Hey everybody, welcome to today's Cathedral webinar. You are tuning in for day 5 of the 5-day NAHASDA Tribal Council Roles and Responsibilities webinar. Your instructor, Cheryl A. Cosley, is principal of Cheryl A. Cosley and Associates, Housing, Consulting, and Management Services. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also grateful that you could tune in and join us for this fantastic week of webinars. Again, we're in day 5, y'all. We made it to the finish line. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have the copyright infringement law printed here. So just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Speaking of the materials, I have put a link to today's presentation slides for you in the chat. And moving forward, you can find all the presentations, all the webinar recordings, and the generous list of resource materials that Cheryl put together for you in the courses section under the course Tribal Council Roles and Responsibilities under NAHASDA. There's about 32 items, and there's also a reference list. So I encourage you to go through there, click on the links, and download all of them. It'll pull up PDF copies for you of everything. Moving forward, if you want to join us for our future webinars, we hope you'll certainly come back. You can always just log in during the webinar time and join us by clicking on that green banner at the top of the screen. We do ask that you join with listen-only capabilities, but it's just because it helps to cut down on audio feedback. When people join with their mics on, it tends to make a screeching noise, a little distracting, and for those with sensitive hearing, it kind of hurts. But no worries, if you joined with yours on, you can always just mute yourself. If you find that my voice is coming out of the wrong device, maybe you're trying to use your headphones, maybe you have a Bluetooth speaker, whatever the case may be, you can always go down to the bottom of your screen and you can click on that little telephone icon, and that'll pull up a list of your mic and your speaker devices so that you can select the right one. We do, of course, encourage class participation. We want to know your questions. We want to know your comments. If you have any tech support issues that I can try to help you navigate through, we're going to primarily rely on the public chat. So if you don't have that open, you can go to the messages panel and click on public chat. And anything you want to say or ask, you can just click on the box that says send message to public chat, type in what you want to say and hit enter, or you can click on that cute little paper airplane button and that'll send it in. With Cheryl's presentations, usually she's going to end up answering your questions as she goes through the rest of her slides. But if you wanted to send the question in just to make sure it gets remembered and gets answered at the end, you can feel free to do that. And in the shared notes section, there's going to be a list of helpful links. We have the link to our webinar feedback survey. Link to the presentation slides is also in there. You could friend us on LinkedIn. If you want to sign up for our email blasts, you'll always know when our webinars are happening so that you can join in the future. And there's some other helpful stuff in there too. And again, if you did join with your mic unmuted, no worries. You can always just mute yourself down here at the bottom. But we would love if you guys took a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat before we get started. You could let us know your name, where you're tuning in from. It's always really cool to see how many different tribal nations are represented. Your work or your role in Indian country probably led you to today's webinar, but maybe not. And then your tribal affiliation, if you have one. You might be like me, where you're a tribal employee and you don't have affiliation. That's okay too. Still a webinar for you. We're happy to have you. And then just a quick final note while you guys are introducing yourselves in the chat, just note that that red menu panel all the way to the left-hand side of your screen, yours might not be expanded. Yours might just be the little symbols here. But just know that if you click on it, it is going to immediately pull you from the webinar and it's going to take you to whatever you clicked on. You can always just rejoin by clicking the green banner, but I just want to give you a heads up that that will pull you out. And there's no warning or anything telling you, it'll just, there you go. So just want to give you that note. But while you are introducing yourselves in the chat, it's with great pleasure I introduce your webinar for day 5. Cheryl A. Cosley of Cheryl A. Cosley and Associates. And Cheryl, I am handing it off to you now.
Thank you very, very much, Brooke. Thank you guys for coming back. You made it to day 5. Again, this is brought to you courtesy of the Native Learning Center and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We fall under the Native American program. So welcome and good afternoon. Just went and smudged. You guys know all about me, but in case there's people jumping on later on, I have to do the introduction every day, so I hate to bore you, but my name is Cheryl Cosley. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman. I come from Keno-Shinkoning in my language, which means the place of the pike, and that's the Bay Mills Indian community. We're located in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right at the very, very top. Our waters actually border Canada. So we're Ojibwe or Chippewa. I served as director of housing for over 28 years. I also served as the chairperson for the Great Lakes Indian Housing Association for 7 years, staggered, That's the 31 tribes surrounding the Great Lakes. And I served on the National American Indian Housing Council for over 16 years. Started as a secretary, went to vice chair, became a 2-term chairwoman. I started Cheryl Cosley and Associates in 2019, providing training and technical assistance throughout the lower 48 in Alaska. I travel extensively. I very much enjoy it. I've done that my pretty much whole life. And I teach virtually a lot too, just like this. So if I'm not on the road, I'm teaching virtually. So I'm just very, very blessed to be able to spend, since 1990, helping our tribes with their housing. So I just really, really can't say enough how blessed I am. My information is at the beginning and at the end of the presentation. Should you ever need anything, please feel free to reach out to me. I will always try to help you. This course was designed to hopefully help, especially council members, but anybody that within the organization or the tribe that needs to learn about the program. It is to make sure that we know the regulations, the federal regulations, everything that we have to adhere to accept that money, and to make sure that we're compliant, and learn about all the different requirements and policies and things like that we have to have in place. So the reference materials, again, please grab them if you haven't. Right now, our website on Code Talk is not too easy to find certain things. They're rebuilding it from what I understand, so that'll be really good. All of our materials for understanding our laws and regulations, basically our guidance documents, are 1, 2, and 3, in addition to program notices and public and Indian housing notices and program guidances. And then it's really important that should you be with the housing authority or housing entity, or you have oversight there, that your A&O portion is running really, really well. There's documents that you should have on hand in a printed form, perhaps in a binder, to make sure that you're doing things correctly. As far as your A&O goes, it can get you in trouble if you don't. A lot of times that's, besides procurement, the areas that you have the most findings, it's also the 2 most important policies that you guys are going to have. But the guidance 5, 6, and 7 are really important, as well as the insurance requirements. That HOPMA guidance, we talked about that earlier in the week. If you're utilizing Section 8, you're going to have to make sure that your policy is compliant by December 31st of this year, and that means adopted also. So keep your eye out for that. The policy status table, to make sure that you have all of the, the majority of the policies that you're going to need or that you're required to have. So grab, please, these, or stick them on a thumb drive or whatever, and we'll get on with today. So we're going to finish out, the self-monitoring requirements for your IHP and APR. We're going to talk about the formula and monitoring activities, audit requirements, and that organizational structure and ONAP monitoring plan is pretty important. It kind of shows you what they're going to come in and look for when they do their monitoring. So hopefully that'll help you with the compliance end of that. So you're self-monitoring. The tribal council is ultimately responsible to make sure that the self-monitoring is done. When you submit, or the APR is submitted on the behalf of your agency, you're certifying that you do, or you have done, your self-monitoring for the year. You don't wait until your APR is due to do your self-monitoring. That should be staggered throughout the year, because there's certain times of the year you don't want to be monitoring a particular department. In the middle of building season, you don't want to be doing the procurement. You don't want to be looking at the files or the A&O in the middle of research or inspection time. So you pick the slow times, and that's when you do the monitoring for those particular areas. You can utilize different people to do your monitoring. It's really, really important. That a set of fresh eyes looks at things, but there are actually documents in here that kind of show, again, like at the end of the course today, what HUD's going to look for. Give those to your staff. Utilize them for the self-monitoring, but hey, I would like to know if I'm in the A&O department, this is what they're going to look for in my files. That way I could make sure that I have them in my files, so look at all of those. There's all sorts of different things, and they're kind of, wonky and, where they're named, but it even goes to the lead-based paint requirements. So who's going to be in charge of that? Is it the maintenance guys? Is it your procurement guys? Because a lot of times, your lead-based paint is going to have to do with when you're handed out money for perhaps rehab. But it kicks in other places too. Plus your A&O people have to think about it a little while, because they have to make sure and certify and give out certain materials. Should your houses be older and maybe possibly contain lead-based paint, hopefully they're all abated. But so self-monitoring, it's the process of recording the operations of a system, observing, reviewing activities over the course of the year. You're detecting your deficiencies and taking steps to correct them. I used to feel dread, oh no, it's audit time. Not HUD audit, but just audit time. Do we have everything? Can we find it? Everything's got to be retrievable on top, on top of everything else. And I had a vice chairman, and he says, Cheryl, he says, embrace the audit. He says, if you find out you did something wrong, fix it. He says, use them when you don't know if you can do something. Call that auditor up and ask them. But, don't dread it. It's a way to make you stronger, basically. So I had to look at it from that perspective. I still have a hard time with that perspective, but, so you find the deficiencies and you take steps to correct them. So hopefully, there's certain ways when we get into this or whatever, that maybe if you find something you did wrong, you can list it. And hopefully if and when they find it, you can say, hey, we addressed that in 2025, and this is how we did it. So recording and reporting through your annual compliance assessment and your annual performance report. As a recipient, you have to monitor your grant accounts and activities in accordance with the IHP, complete a compliance assessment, including inspection of your units. So part of that APR is to make sure that you are in boots in every property that you own. So I might have said this during the week, but I've been in places where they say, yeah, that's a home ownership home. We don't have to take care of that. We don't have to inspect it. Oh, yes, you do. If the housing authority is the ultimate owner of that particular property, and let's say it's a 25-year lease period, 23rd year, the family composition changes, they go broke, whatever the reason, they just don't decide that they don't want that house anymore. It gets given back to you, and you have to put it up all the way to brand new and find a new homeowner. It would behoove you, or, it would be smart if you were in there once a year and looking it over, checking out your property, telling them, this is a little bit more than wear and tear. We're going to give you a couple of months to fix those holes in the walls, put those doors back on, make sure you got smoke alarms, all that stuff. Fix those blinds, replace them. If they don't, and you tell them that, I'll be happy to send our crew in and we'll bill you for that. But it's getting taken care of, and it's not all at once. And it's just like your rental properties. You install blinds on there, and the kids mess up the blinds, and you go in there and it's cost mom $40 to replace them or whatever. That happens a couple of times. Mom's going to watch those kids a little bit harder when it comes to those blinds. Hey, I'm not going to pay for those for a third time. You'll see them take better care of things that they have to replace. So make sure you do all your inspections, including your home ownership properties. Okay, you have to include a summary and results, corrective actions in your annual performance report. So it helps ensure compliance with the rules, with the regulations, to make sure that your policies and procedures are up to date. Don't put a policy into effect that you're not going to follow. It can get you in trouble. You have a policy about, junk cars or res dogs, and you don't enforce it, and something happens. Kids get locked in the trunk, or the bricks fall down on them, or they get bit by one of your dogs that are running around without a leash. They're going to call a lawyer, and they're going to ask for your policies. Then they're going to ride around your properties, and they're going to start counting how many dogs, how many junk dog or cars, and you've lost your lawsuit. So if you're not going to enforce it, take the policy away, unless it's a required one, and then you find a way to enforce it. So your self-monitoring, you can pick up at that time too. Your consistency with your IHP. You told them what you're going to do for the year. Did you do it? Your efficiency. How efficient are your programs? How good are your maintenance staff? How often are they actually going into a house except to prepare it for a new tenant? How effective is your staff? Are they, the collection staff? Are they doing what they're supposed to be? A good collection policy tells you what you're going to do on the 10th day, the 15th day, the 30th. It's a play by number. It doesn't matter who it's regarding. You do it the same way. So it judges the policies, the procedures, everything that you have into place, your programs. So NAHASDA, the statute itself, requires periodic monitoring, not less than frequently. Annually, sorry guys, not less frequently than annually. Each recipient shall review the activities conducted, the housing assisted under the Act, to assess their compliance with the requirements of the Act. Such review shall include that on-site inspection of housing to determine compliance with those applicable results or, requirements. The results of each review shall be included in your performance report of the recipient submitted to the secretary, so your IHP, and made available to the public. So your APR has to be public. The thing about that is, how long does it have to be public for? I called 3 different HUD offices. I combed through every piece of that legislation, and I couldn't find the date. So then I asked a couple of people pretty high up that actually, had done monitoring and things like that. Tell me your sweet spot, I said. What would you like me to be telling my students that they should be striving for? And 2 weeks, basically, 10 business days. And when you're writing policy, make sure you put business or calendar days. Makes difference. And that seemed to be the sweet spot. It was like, if it's up for 2 weeks, that's good. So now they will ask, did you post it? And how long did you post it for? And they might say, that 3 days is not enough. So when it comes especially to your APR, you should have a listing of your IHP, your APR. Some of those passwords that you need should be easily retrievable. But so people know when those dates are, especially if you're the ED or the person that prepares those, and something should happen, or you get, you quit, or you have an emergency at home, for a period of time, or whatever the reason, they need to be able to function without you. You don't want to think of yourself as expendable by any means, but you need to give them, everybody needs to know when their due dates are for all of their important events. And that date for that APR should start months before the date for the actual, due date. because you have to put it out for public comment for 2 weeks, pretty much. You have to bring it to your board of jurisdiction. So you got to get on that calendar. You've got to make sure all your inspections are done. You have to make sure your APR is complete and all of your monitoring is done. So that thing gets kicked back along, a lot longer than the date that should be on there. So the results of your review is supposed to be listed in that APR. You are responsible for monitoring your grant activities to ensure compliance with the applicable federal requirements and monitoring performance goals under the IHP. It's to demonstrate your accountability for your performance, to make sure that you're compliant with all those regulations. Find your weaknesses if you have them. Improve your program, your efficiency, your effectiveness of the things that you're doing, and to build that organizational capacity of your housing entity. The federal agency has to require you to relate financial data to your performance accomplishments, demonstrate that you're cost effective. Data is measured in a way to help improve program outcomes, share lessons learned, spread the adoption of promising practices. It's like the inventory of your guys' maintenance barns. That's buried deep within the OMB guidances, but you're supposed to be doing inventory of your properties once a year. That has to be built in so you remember to do it. And let me tell you, the first time you have them inspect and inventory their barns, they're going to hate you because it's not a fun job. That's when you find out about surplus equipment and things like that, Wow, we have 40 windows that are totally mismatched, That might tell you, okay, we need to standardize the doors we put in, make them big enough for a wheelchair, perhaps the windows, the types of appliances, so they can be interchangeable. You learn that after years, the steps that you can make to be stronger there. So, data is measured in a way to help improve your program outcomes, share your lessons learned, spread the adoption, hopefully, of promising practices. So you're responsible for oversight of your operations of your federal award. You have to monitor your activities to make sure you're compliant with all those requirements and those performance expectations. Recipient monitoring has to cover each program, function, and activity. And it applies to sub-recipients and sub-awards should you have people in place that do that. You see that primarily in places where they have properties in many, many areas, like the Navajo, for instance. I worked with like a sub part of them at one point. They'll have, sub-awards over some of their properties because they're 4 states wide, It doesn't happen a lot when you're in charge of one thing and you're in one county, and there's some places, the tribes I've worked with up in California that could be 100 miles. They got one property here and another one over 100 miles away. You have to be pretty cost efficient with your maintenance and things like that. And you build that in here. So you cover each program, every function, every activity, and make sure you apply it if you have sub-recipients or anybody running your properties, So you can utilize anybody you want to help monitoring. You can utilize your whole staff, the tribe when the recipient is the TDHE, your auditor, objective third parties, and HUD. So the grant portions and things like that, I utilize some of our professors from our community college. The accounting at one point, I pulled a couple of people from the tribal, that knew finance. You can do it that way. At one point, we used to try using sister tribes and things like that, but I don't know what it is about tribes, but they sure don't like to share very well, or they don't like another tribe knowing too much of their information. So, as much as we wanted to do it on the housing level, they didn't really like it very high up the ladder, so, but you can try it. Related responsibilities: provide periodic progress reports to your tribe. You're responsible to that council. You need to find out every time you have a rollover, basically, what do you guys want to know? How often do you want to know it? Do you want a monthly report, a quarterly report, or just the annual performance report? Or, how would you like to, now there's that side of me, because I was a housing authority and we were totally separate there for a while, that you don't want them to know how much money you have, because you're saving it to build something big. You know what I mean? And oh, you're sitting on that much money? Well, I'm sitting on that much money because if I build 100 units, do you know how much that cost? So you have that happens. But they are entitled to know everything, so tribes with TDHE, you monitor to ensure they're in compliance with the NAHASDA, the implementation of your Indian housing plan. Consider comments from the tribe and public after you review your annual performance report, because you put it out for public comment. Now, I'm going to be very honest. Unless you have a lot of verbal tribal members or unhappy ones, a lot of times, there's times you won't get a comment for a couple of years. So conduct an annual audit if required. We're going to talk about that at the end of the class, but that threshold went from 750 to $1 million. I haven't seen a HUD document. I shouldn't say that. Saw a document, but not a HUD document. You would have thought they would have done a mailing to us, So it's $1 million from 750 of expenditures, within a year. So your threshold got bigger. Sometimes that's not always good, because if you're going down the wrong path and you're doing something wrong, especially if you don't know you're doing something wrong and you're not doing your self-monitoring, sometimes that audit will help you out and it'll save you from going in deeper. So the overview, observe and review your activities over the course of the year, not just when the APR is due. Detect your deficiencies and take steps to correct them. Record and report through your compliance assessment, your APR. Assess your compliance with your IHP. Did you do everything you said you were going to do? The law and the regulations. And look at those IHPs. Take a breath. It got in. I got a ways now till my APR is done. Let's pull out 4 or 5 years worth and look at these activities. Am I just rinsing and repeating? And, I'm saying I'm going to do 25 of these, and I'm actually lucky if I get 5 done on a year. 1 year I got 10, drop that amount. You can always change that IHP. You want to do that because they do kind of grade it on the APR end, because you're putting funds away for that activity, then you're not doing it. And then you have those funds that didn't get spent where they were supposed to. It kind of looks bad after a while, so solve your problems promptly if you do identify them. This is a sample self-monitoring. The different portions most people actually monitor: your planning department, your policy and procedure review. Somebody should be checking. Do we have every policy we're supposed to have? Do we have proof of adoption? Are they all in one place? Can I retrieve them? Do they say draft on them? They say draft on them. You got a problem. You got to get them on the table and get them adopted. Your IHP, your APR compliance, and if they're like I do when I write, you'll see me quote the law. This is the number that it says to go move. So I was preparing a procurement class, and contract administration. I went in, and I have a lot of slides when I teach because my students have told me that they like to be able to look things up. That's why, it's always in there like that. And I'll be jiggered, I guess you would say. It took me almost 4 or 5 days to update my class because the 200 document, the uniform guidance, has been changed. It was updated in October and November, and then they updated again. And all of our numbers, almost all the numbers that I use with procurement, are off by like 1. They added something in there. Most administrations try to stick within, not this one. So all my numbers were off. So I had to check every single law, every single guidance number, every single reference, and then fix it. And then they moved the language around a lot. So if within your policy, we tend to quote the law, check to see if it's accurate, if it's been updated, because there was a whole bunch of changes to that one. That's just to help you. Okay. So, your IHP, your APR compliance, your structure of your organization. Are you top heavy in one place? You know, do you have a whole bunch of people in one department and not a lot to do? And then in other ones you're struggling? Look at that. One of the other things you really need to look at, and I discussed it earlier in the week, look at your position descriptions, what your staff is supposed to be doing, and see if they're doing what they were hired to do. Because it morphs into what they're really good at or what they want to do, or you find out they can't do it at all, so the tribe says keep them. And they're in there and nothing matches their job description. So you're punting pretty much when you do their evaluation portion, which you're also supposed to be doing. I hate that part of the year. Or I didn't care for that part of the year either. But make sure that those are updated. That's also, you know, under your organizational structure. Your administration and occupancy, like I said, that's really, really important. That's where you get, and you have to make sure that you're giving them all of the deductions and things that they need. You're adhering to the law. You're counting this money when you should and not this money when you can't. Because that'll result in findings and repayment, you know, or paying somebody back. So be careful there. Like I said, that's one of your most important, and then that procurement and that contract, and making sure you keep those records. You know, there's a law basically that says 3 years for certain documents. There's certain documents you don't get rid of. And any of your documents, if you have somebody try to sue you or you're involved in grievance, anything with it, that 3-year clock stops, and until it's done, you know, you can't get rid of any of that information that way either. Environmental review is another part. There's a lot of things that unless you're doing building, you're just certifying to, you have to have that in a place where it's retrievable, because they're going to come and they're going to look at that. So show me your environmental files. You know, I went into one place that was a quarter of the size of this office, half of the size of this office, and it was stacked all the way to the ceiling with files. And we had to search through every box to find anything that was environmentally, you know, relevant. It shouldn't be like that, okay? So you should have all of your environmental stuff in a retrievable place by year, by activity. You do that during your APR or your self-monitoring. Is your stuff retrievable? And then, you know, you finally, you come up with that self-monitoring report. So if you find something, what do you do? So let's say, here's my A&O staff. Guys, I want you to check for this. You go through and you find 2 families where they're either missing documentation to get into the household, or they're over income. Hey, maybe they're 80 to 100%, but they never made it over to that list, you know, to be counted off of your, or you don't have that in place where you're helping your over income members. What do? You write about it, you figure out how you're going to fix it, and you identify it. So this is what we discovered. Put a big old red piece of paper on the front of that file with an explanation. This is when we found it during our self-monitoring for the 2025 year. This is what we discovered. It was missing this, this, and this. How did you fix it? Well, we retrieved the documents that we were missing. We adjusted their rent. We put them on the temporary, you know, whatever it be. And we scheduled an A&O class for the department. to make sure that that would not happen in the future. We added that particular item perhaps to the checklist. So then you throw it back in the file, you do all that, you have the A&O, you hopefully it'll never happen again. And then what happens is they come in and they check 10% of your files. They check 10 files or 10%, whichever is higher. Okay. So if you run a different program for the tribe, like fair market rent or, something that's not NAHASDA, you keep those in another room or in rolling file cabinets. So when it comes time for that, they're only checking your NAHASDA files because that percentage would, they'd be pulling more. Should they happen to use that randomizer and pull that particular file? Wow, it's red. Yep, we discovered that during our self-monitoring in 2025. This is how we fixed it. They shouldn't give you a finding because you did exactly what this is supposed to identify and hopefully, fix. So do you have a procedure and a policy for self-monitoring? You're answering that. Pursuant to where the recipient is a TDHE, did you provide those periodic progress reports, monitoring reports, annual performance reports to your tribe? Well, if you said you did, you better have proof that you did it, and you better be doing it. Did you conduct self-monitoring, including monitoring any subrecipients if you have them? And then that's where you would list those results of what you've identified. So you're supposed to be doing it. So these are the links that I was talking about. These are so, they haven't been updated in a while, but I was so grateful, and I'm still so grateful that they did these. If you take nothing else from this course, take this and print those off and put them someplace, okay? I have seen where I went up into, working with one of the pueblos, and they had one of their board of commissioners fly in, wasn't in from that state even. It was one of those places where their community members or their board of commissioners don't have to actually be within the community. And she came in and she had the stack of them all bound, and she went and she was starting to do the self-monitoring the week I was there. I thought, that's great. Fresh eyes, using this will tell her, it'll tell her what to look for. It's just smart, so that will help you. That'll help you, give you a start, to do your monitoring. So HUD's responsibilities: reviewing your APR that's submitted, providing TA if you need it. It's free, remember. It takes 3 to 4 months sometimes to get you here, because the procedure for that is you're going to put into whatever office that you're from, whatever region, and they'll call you, and don't be alarmed. I used to, because I was in charge of the training, or was one of the people that worked on our training committee for NIHC. It's like, you're asking them to have a discussion and tell about their weaknesses. That's kind of hard. I don't want to be telling my boss that I don't know how to do something. Are we putting them in a bad position? Because I would hear that. I don't want to tell HUD I don't know how to do that, but so they have this phone call and they will invite you. And if you ask for a trainer, they'll have that trainer on there, or they'll perhaps have who they're thinking about. And you sit on there in the agency, because it could be, could be NLC that gets the assignment, could be NIHC that gets the assignment, could be LISC, or it could be First Pick. There's several agencies that work with our tribes. And they'll have that phone call. Can you tell me, you put in this request, and make sure everything that you want is on that request. Otherwise, they'll oftentimes say, fill out another one, and you've got to go through it again. So you get down there and you say, you don't have to be embarrassed or anything like that. You talk to them and you say, yeah, I think that we need help with our policies. I want to make sure that I'm NAHASDA compliant. We would like executive director training. They're brand new. We'd like board of commissioner training. They're brand new. You just tell them what you want. Procurement and contract administration. Why? Because we want to make sure we're not making any mistakes, so, and then they say, okay, whatever, and they'll give it to somebody, or if they've assigned it already, they'll say, okay, you contact them, and then you have to work up these plans, and then it's got to go all the way back up the chain in DC and get signed off on, and then you're ready to go out on the road and work or do it virtually. So it's not always quick. If you think you want it in the future, ask for it now, because it'll probably be 3 or 4 months before you actually see somebody. 2 months, best case scenario, but it's getting a little bit more closer to 3 on the majority of the time. So that's what happens, and it's free, and they can come multiple times if that's what you request, you know. So there's no reason not to get trained. Okay. Do it while there's money there. There's a lot of money sitting there for that, but the government will look at that too. You know, that's just the way it is. Conducting a review of all your records, all your reports, all your audits. Make sure you get your audits on time. Okay. I've seen tribes get in a lot of trouble and almost lose their money because they didn't have those audits done. They'll make on-site visits as appropriate. It depends on if your audits are on time, if your IHPs and your APRs are on time, and how much money you get. That will determine usually how frequently they visit. Provide TA and training when requested. You know, they have staff also that can help you. Don't ever be afraid to call HUD. They're there to help you. The other sections, your inspections, your audits, your public accountability, that you've actually put that out for public comment. How many jobs did you support with NAHASDA? And did you have any waiver request within your IHP? So that pretty much, you know, is talking about the component about self-monitoring. You know, should you, and you can get self-monitoring training also, by the way. You got to have a system. Somebody's got to have that in place. You got to make sure your tribe does. So you might, you know, if you're a council member, you might say, hey, tell me about your self-monitoring. How are you doing that? You know, because we're ultimately responsible to make sure that that's being done. So the formula, this is basically how you get your money. It's based on the allocation that we get on the yearly basis from Congress. The tribes, the TDHEs, that comes across like June 1st. You should look at that information that's on there. Also, if you have a brand new ED, don't expect them to know what they're looking at, for one thing. The longer you've been there, the better it is. But there's certain times that you might even want to bring that document to your grant writers if you have them, and your enrollment people. And sometimes, you know, the council, if they're very involved, if they've been there a while, because it asks, you know, about how many people that you have that are overcrowded, how many people that do you have that are 80% of median income, and different portions of income. How many are over, you know, like I said, overcrowded. There's different components to that. But your grant writers usually have that information. Your enrollment office can tell you if the figure they're using for enrollment is correct. The average Joe doesn't know that. But, you know, you can get that information. Hey, can you look at this? Does this seem right to you? Because you're allowed to challenge it also. So it's used to allocate our grant monies. You play an important role by reviewing or reporting and verifying information. So the data allows ONAP to allocate the money equitably and fairly to all of our eligible, you know, recipients. The statutory requirements for the formula allocation you can find within Title III of that NAHASDA statute. The regulatory requirements are found at 1,301 to 340 in our regs. Okay. So it allocates the block grant funds, developed as part of negotiated rulemaking. Now I explained, you know, earlier in the week what neg reg was. That's what we call it. It's done by unanimous consent, so it can sometimes really be a hard product. I chaired the formula committee one year for that. Never do that again, because when you're talking about money after formula runs, you know, you have to have people sometimes say, okay, I can take this smaller hit if it benefits everybody, you know, if we do it this way. But they have to convey neg reg whenever they do anything, make any adjustments, anything to our formula. So that's a protection mechanism that was put into place to make sure that we did well. So the intent is to make an equitable distribution of those annual appropriations, and that allocation is the basis of your annual budget. The formula response form, like I said, that first week in June, June 1st, depending on when it falls on, used to get mailed to you. You have to get online and look at it. So it's there for this year. You know, it's been there for almost a month, 2 months. You can look at it, check it out. That's, like I said, that's just a run right now. It's your estimate. Corrections are due 60 days after the date of that formula response form. If you wanted to do a census challenge, if you wanted to do a challenge to it, you basically have to have that done the year before, like March of the prior year. So you could start one now for next year if you looked at it and your stuff was out of whack, or you have an overlapping formula area. We'll talk about that. So corrections have to be submitted to the Formula Customer Service Center. So you could call your HUD office, but there is a group at First Pick that have been doing this for years. And they're very, very knowledgeable. They're knowledgeable about your tribes. A lot of them have been there that long that you can ask them a question. Yeah, don't you remember? We had this and this was wrong. And, you know, they have that institutional memory. I hope we don't lose very many of them, and not too fast, because they're good. They can tell you why you get the amount that you have. There has been times that I have seen situations where there's tribes, because we used to compete for the money, they would get a competition perhaps for 15 mutual help houses, let's say. And then it's time and they build them and they say, we'd like to make them rentals. And if they didn't go through the right steps, okay, and I know of cases where this has happened, the stipend that we receive, the subsidy that we receive on those current assisted stocks, those units that were built with the 1937 Act funds, not NAHASDA, those are the only ones that came with an allocation to them. The mutual help ran out. There should be very, very few mutual help units out in existence right now that still have a subsidy on them. Okay, that program was designed for a 25-year max. And it expired pretty much in 96, okay, 97. So you count it, they should all be conveyed right now. You're talking 2 to 3 years play if they were built the last year. A lot of them were built way before that. So the mutual help subsidy is almost gone. The rental subsidy, and they were 2 different amounts, came forever. So my mentor was the vice chairman of my husband's tribe, 25 miles away. He was the chair of NIHC. He was the chair of Amarant. And I used to ride with him a lot because he hated small planes. So we would sometimes drive to Green Bay. I would jump in with him and we would fly from there. He used to say, you should be building more rentals because of the subsidy. I had a tribal chairman that wanted all of our tribal members to own homes, to have home ownership. And before, 184 and things like that, I could get a car loan for $40,000, $50,000 all day long. You think I could get $4,000 or $5,000 for a trailer? Nope, because they couldn't repo it. So I built a lot of mutual help homes. And he was right. I should have been building rentals because all of their rentals that they have running, they're still getting those subsidies on them. But I have a whole bunch of homeowners on my reservation. So you play, you decide which is best. So then I turned around and said, okay, all the proceeds of sale from mutual help, I'm going to start building fair market units with that I can charge a little bit more for my people that make a little bit more money, or for the essentials that come within the tribe. And that was a way, because I was going to work myself out of that money. because all those mutual help houses conveyed. That's what you wanted, you know, but then you've lost all that income. So you have to make sure those rental properties. So there was people that actually had mutual help that they ran like a rental. And if they didn't change, and I know of some administrators that said, that's all right. You know, they probably thought they'd never be around 20, 25 years from now. Now they don't have any more funding on what they're running as a rental, and they don't understand why. And it's because they didn't correct the paperwork. You're looking at your paperwork on a yearly basis. You have this many rentals that you're getting current assisted stock for, and this many mutual help if you still have some in the system somehow. Okay. Look at that, make sure it's right. Now, I've been in places where they said they've been in that rental for 25 years. And as counsel, they'll say, we should just give them the house. And I've seen places where they have done that. Now, when I go in, I say, I'm not going to argue with you that they don't deserve a house, but build them another one. And they look at me. Why would we build them a brand new house? Because you're going to lose that subsidy forever for that house that they're in. Build them another one. You know, build them a smaller one. Whatever you got to do. Don't lose the subsidy. Don't give away that subsidy because there's no way that you can get it back. So that's just, you know, something that you got to look at. Now, you can't use for your current assisted stock. They have to be rented, okay? And they're going to look at your rent rolls. And I have seen cases where they got trashed and they just let them rot. But they don't change their formula. They don't call them and say, we're no longer renting that unit and give up that subsidy for them. Or if you make it a non-habitable unit, you turn it into a laundromat, something like that. You can't collect that money on it. Or if it's a VASH unit, because the VASH has a subsidy and this one has a subsidy and you can't double dip. So the rule of thumb, I guess, would be protect your current assisted rental stock with everything you have. The minute that it becomes vacant, that should be the priority of your maintenance crews. You take it, you rehab it, and you start renting it again, because you don't want it a history of a rent roll that is, you know, there it hasn't been rented, because it's 1 year time, basically. It's kind of the same rule as a demo dispo. That thing has got to be, to protect that subsidy, there's got to be a tenant in there on a yearly basis. So just protect it, okay? And don't give it away. Build them another one if you have to. But that's the current assisted stock. When you see CAS, that's what they're talking about. So your corrections have to be submitted to that formula center. If you don't understand it, if you have any question, they are so good. Call them up. The information's on this slide. So your final allocation, they can vary from that estimate based on many reasons. Hey, they came in and they audited, and this tribe had 15 units that it's been collecting money on that there's been nobody in them. Guess what? They have to pay back all that money, and it goes back into that allocation. And that happens a lot too. So different final allocations, amounts, you know, than what was used in the estimate. Your tribe's data changed, other tribes' data changed, you know, your estimate can be off, you know. So it's distributed through a formula, calculated annually, depending upon the appropriation from Congress. That first formula runs June 1st. You're supposed to look at that, have eyes on that. Make sure if it says you have 10 current assisted stock rental units that you do and you're renting them. Otherwise, you got to do some digging. The date of that final formula run is going to be dependent upon when the president signs appropriations into law. It has 4 key components, okay? It's got multiple, but 4 key. Your current assisted stock, which I just explained. Your need portion. Your 1996 minimum, and the undispersed IHBG funds factor, which is our newest component. So your formula current assisted stock, your need, you know, like I said, those are the components. So that's what I was just talking about. It could have been a low rent, could have been a mutual help, could have been turnkey, could have been a Section 8 certificate. I didn't mention that. So are you still utilizing those? 37 units in the development pipeline after NAHASDA. Section 8 expired, but still managed like a Section 8 program. So the FCAS formula, there was an operating subsidy and a modernization allocation. It's adjusted by what we got in 1996. The average for our operating subsidy and our modernization allocation that we got for the year. The local cost and inflation. So there was changes to the FCAS rules in 2017. They removed reducing Section 8 units based on FCAS reductions. They codified, some conversions and policies required for reporting on that formula response form. They clarified homeownership unit eligibility, becoming eligible for conveyance. You have to convey that unit if it's eligible. Now, if there's a legal impediment, they give you a short period of time to fix it. They clarified demolished and rebuilt unit eligibility so that I demo-dispoed a 10-unit project. I inherited a 10-unit project that was built for the Southwest, had glass windows in it, had no insulation, doesn't work when it's 20 or 30 below. And so they molded, they frosted, they heaved, they did everything that they could do because they were fighting because this is not the weather they were built for. And then proved that it was more efficient for me to tear them down and use that footprint than it was trying to use the existing stuff and rehab it. I utilized BIA, IHS, engineers, got them all involved, all the paperwork, and then you had to have it rebuilt within 1 year to save those subsidies, the current assisted stock that came with those. So you can read about, that at 1316, 1318. You have to report changes to information relating to your formula on your formula response form, including corrections to the number of your current assisted stock units during the time period required by HUD. It shall be not less than 60 days from the date of the letter that HUD publishes, basically the form for our recipients. It's the only mechanism you can use to report changes to the number of your units, to your FCAS. It's called Formula Current Assisted Stock. So it's the money you get the subsidies on, built with the 1937 Act funds. So a conversion, the final rule added 316, which adds the existing unit conversion policy to the regulation. Before the rule went into effect, we were only required to report the units converted before 1997. Under this new rule, beginning in 2018, you are required to report all unit conversions on the formula response form. So if you have a rental that you give over to somebody and start making it a mutual help, you have to put it on there, okay? So when do units under the stock cease to be counted or expire from the inventory? So your mutual help, your turnkey, are supposed to no longer be considered formula current assisted stock when you no longer have the legal right to operate or maintain that unit, whether it be lost by conveyance, demolition, or otherwise provided. The conveyance of your mutual help, your turnkey, should occur as soon as practicable after a unit becomes eligible for conveyance by the terms of your mutual help and occupancy agreement. Your tribe, your TDHE, your IHA is supposed to actively enforce strict compliance with your home buyer for the terms and conditions of that mutual help and occupancy agreement. That was the document that we had binding us to those houses, including the requirements for full and timely payment. So a unit not conveyed after it becomes conveyance eligible by the terms of that agreement. So after your time period has elapsed on there, it can continue to be considered formula current assisted stock only if there is a legal impediment which continues to exist. You, as a tribe, TDHE, Housing Authority has taken all the steps necessary to convey that unit, and all that remains for conveyance is a resolution to that legal impediment. And that the tribe, Housing Authority, whoever, however, has made the following reasonable efforts to overcome those impediments. No later than 4 months after the unit becomes available, you create a written plan of action, which includes a description of your specific legal impediment, as well as specific ongoing and appropriate actions for each applicable unit that has been taken and will be taken to resolve the legal impediment within a 24-month period, okay? And you've carried out or you're carrying out that written plan of action. Your tribe, your TDHE, your IHA has documented undertaking the plan of action. So if you have a mutual help or a turnkey unit, it is not supposed to be considered FCAS eligible 24 months after the date it became eligible for conveyance, unless you provide evidence from a third party, such as a court, a state court, a federal government agency, documenting that you have a legal impediment that continues to prevent conveyance. So you really shouldn't have any mutual help units out there. But I know of a couple, so I know they're still out there. FCAS units that have not been conveyed due to legal impediments by December of 2016 shall be treated as having become eligible for conveyance as of December 2016. So your rental units shall continue to be included in the formula for as long as they continue to be operated as a low-income rental unit, not a mutual help, by your tribe, TDHE, or IHA. Expired contract Section 8 units shall continue as rental units and be included in the formula as long as they are operated as a low-income rental unit and included in your tribe or TDHE's formula response form. A unit that is demolished pursuant to a planned demolition, so a demo dispo, may be considered eligible as FCAS if you can rebuild that unit within 1 year. If it can't be rebuilt because of a relative administrative capacity or other challenges faced by the recipient, a one-time 1-year extension can be requested. So I told you about that. I had a 20-unit apartment building that I built that had a fire in it. Had to relocate everybody, middle of the winter. The 1 year's coming around and it's not fully occupied yet. We had to pay attention to getting houses basically for all of those people. That was the first thing that we had to deal with. Then you have to remove all of the stuff, do your insurance claims. For those of you that ever thought of this, I tried, it didn't work. I said, since it's not really NAHASDA money, it's my insurance money that's coming from Ameren, do I have to follow all those rules? And they said, yes, Cheryl, you do. So I tried it. You can't do it. You have to follow all the rules, all the bidding, all the procurement, all that fun stuff. So with us getting snow by Halloween and it still being on the ground until May and load limits, so they can't even, use cement trucks, it gave me too short of a building period. And I couldn't make the 1 year. Got an extension, so you can do that. I always start with the HUD office and then you go to them, but it's you're supposed to be going through the number here for the Formula Center. Requests submitted in writing to the Formula Center include a justification for the request. So, units not built as FCAS. So if you built over the number, because remember I told you we used to compete. I would write this big old grant. It'd have to be in the mail, posted by 3 o'clock. So, there was times that we'd work all night doing those. And then hope nobody got in our way between here and the mailbox or the mail office, 10 miles away. And we would compete. We did really well here under that competition. But it told you, you have been awarded 10 rental units. You have been awarded 25 mutual help units, So there was times that I'd get awarded 10 and be able to build 11. I thought I was being efficient. I was being efficient. But units that were built over the number specified in your original annual contributions contract, that's what that ACC means, with a DOFA, that's a date of full availability, after October 1st, 1997, wouldn't count as AFCAS. So if I built an extra unit that particular year in 1997, I wouldn't get the money for that unit. It would just be a unit that I have for free, but it would have lost that money. So units not used as low-income housing dwelling units include conveyance eligible. So if it's mutual help and you were supposed to convey it, a unit that you demolished, or, you know, it burnt down or whatever, and you never rebuilt it within the 1 year, that's not eligible for that FCAS. Units, anything that we build with NAHASDA funds has no FCAS to it. And that's something that I always have to explain to people that have been around. How come there's no subsidy with that? Well, because it's now built under this. Units that you build for your VASH program, because it's got a VASH subsidy, so you can't have two. Vacant units unless being made available for occupancy. So that's why if you get nothing else, you have units that have FCAS, those need to be your maintenance guys' first priority. I don't care how bad they are, they need to be the first priority. Or units used for a non-dwelling purpose. So if I would have known it, there was a unit that we basically turned into a housing office. And then when we moved, we turned it into an ambulance barn and a fire hall. We, you know, put a big old garage and everything on there. Should have probably tried to make it, you know, that dwelling unit to keep that money attached to it. So review your data, review your formula response form, report any corrections to your unit counts, unit types, actual and expected data full availability, that DOFA for occupancy. You submit it within 60 days of the formula response form publication, usually around August 1st. Submitted corrections are going to be reviewed. HUD will inform the tribes of their corrected unit counts. So what would happen if a recipient misreports or fails to correct formula current assisted stock information? You're responsible for verifying and reporting those changes. They have to verify that that information is accurate. You can read about that at 100315. Reporting shall be completed in accordance with the requirements of the formula response form and subpart D. If you receive an overpayment of funds because you failed to report changes in a timely manner, you're going to be required to repay those funds within 5 fiscal years. Okay? HUD will subsequently distribute the funds to all the other tribes in accordance with the next block grant formula allocation. So that's another reason you see that variance in there. You're not going to be provided back funding for any unit that you failed to report on your formula response form in a timely manner. HUD has 3 years from the date a formula response form is sent out to take action against any recipient that fails to correct or make appropriate changes on that formula response form. Review of your FCAS units will be accomplished by HUD as a component of the audits, routine monitoring, or they can actually just do an FCAS target monitoring or other review. So somebody's got to have their hands and eyes on that document. Sometimes you have to have somebody with a little bit of history to tell you what unit is what on your reservation, but you need to have that. You have to have a good grasp on that. So this is where you find your formula. You can look it up now. Now, after class or Monday. So the second component is need. We have 6 weighted variables. We use the American Community Service, the ACS 5-year data. They also use the decennial census data updated annually using the census population estimates. It is adjusted for your local development cost. You can read about that at 100330. These are our need components, okay? So first of all, your housing cost burden includes more than rent. Your how many homes are overcrowded, how much housing shortage do you have, and then your tribal members. How many do you have that are low income, 50 to 80%? How many do you have that are very low income, 30 to 50? How many do you have that are at poverty level, 30, percent of the area median income? So you get 13% for the ones that are at poverty level. So that's why your grant writers are also good at looking at that type of information. Formula area, the geographic area providing substantial housing services. Your formula area and your Indian area are two different things. What if your formula area is served by more than one tribe? Okay, so I am in what they call a formula overlapping area, okay, with one or more tribes. So I discovered that, and I'm looking at it, and okay, I can understand Sioux tribe. We're less than 20 miles apart. My husband's Sioux tribe, he's on my reservation. I can see where we're overlapping. But we also overlapped with Keweenaw, which is like 3.5 hours away. Explain to me this, So sometimes you have to read that and look and see and maybe put up an argument. They don't have any tribal members here. Show me where they're serving somebody in my area so that our areas should overlap. Sometimes you got to argue just to. So if an Indian tribe's formula area overlaps with the formula area of another Indian tribe, the funds allocated to that tribe for the geographic area in which the formula areas overlap get divided, depending on the tribe's proportional share of the population in that overlapping geographic area, or the tribe's commitment to serve the proportional share. Show me where you're servicing somebody here, so sometimes you got to argue. Now, if you have a state-recognized tribe in your area, in the case where a state-recognized Indian tribe's formula overlaps with a federally recognized Indian tribe, your federally recognized Indian tribe receives the allocation for that overlapping area. Your membership in your geographic area, not to include duly enrolled tribal members, will be based on the data that all the tribes agree to use. They could use enrollment lists, census area information, Indian Health Service user data, or BIA data. You're supposed to try to agree on what you're going to use, but if they cannot agree on what data source is going to be used, HUD's going to make the decision on what data will be used, and they'll divide the funds between the tribes by August 1st, whenever one of you puts up a fight. Okay, so there's a population cap, a control to maintain fairness. Only if you're American Indian, Alaska Native, to do with your enrollment. And there is a challenge process, like I said, available. If you don't understand it, call them up and ask them. So the hold harmless. Now, whatever your tribe received in 1996 for their modernization and operating subsidy for that particular year, your money will never fall below that amount. So that's your bottom line, okay? And that is within the NAHASDA statute. So that will not change unless Congress changes it. So it's a good idea to find out what that amount is. And if you weren't around in 1996, call them up and ask them what they do in that case. How much is it going to be? So you'll know what your bottom line will ever be, okay? This one came about, basically, I was working on it when I was chair at NIHC. I had to have several meetings. We were advocating really, really hard on the Hill with Congress for money. There were tribes, large tribes, that received a lot of money, that didn't expend it quite as fast as Congress wanted. And it looked like, why are you asking for more money when there's pipeline funds? And that's what they were calling it, was pipeline. I convened a meeting of like all the tribal leaders in the Southwest. And I told Congress when I testified, that I will never, ever, I can't, it's not in me. I will never, ever advocate to take money from a tribe, from another tribe. You find another way. You get more money, you do something, you find another mechanism. So this is what everybody, within NIHC, within Congress, within, this is what they finally agreed to do. It only affects a few tribes. It provides an adjustment for tribes who get an initial allocation of $5 million or more per year. So that tells you how many tribes that limits that to. Then they have to have an undispersed block grant fund greater than the sum of their prior 3-year allocations. So if they got $8 million 2 years ago, they got $7 million last year, this year's allocation is $6 million. They would have to be sitting on $21 million in the pipeline. If that happens, the initial allocation gets reduced. Any amount that they recover, because they wouldn't get it from that year, gets redistributed to everyone. If they happen to be an investment tribe, it doesn't apply to them at all. Okay, you have to have your ducks in a row to be an investment tribe. So that is the new formula factor. Okay, it has to be more than their prior 3 years allocation in their pipeline. So look at the formula response form. HUD notifies the recipients of the data to be used on the formula, the projected allocation amount. It's available on the HUD website. The recipients each year, June 1st, it rolls around, unless that's a weekend, then it might come on the 3rd. It is required by regulation. All those allocations used to get mailed. We get this package on our desk. Now you have to get on the Code Talk website or go to the form, and it's got a link, or you go to ihbgformula.com. You can go right now and look and see what you have. So you can challenge your need portion of your formula, provided that the data is gathered, evaluated, and presented in a manner fair and equitable to all the participating tribes. They have until March 30th of each year to submit challenges, to their needs data in consideration for the upcoming fiscal year. Take a picture of it if you're even thinking about it, and that's who you contact to find out, have questions, challenge it, whatever you want to do. Have them explain it to you and walk you through all of what you get. Okay, but this is who, and they're a lovely bunch of people. They're great. So this last one, monitoring, audit, and that monitoring plan. So bottom line, your tribe, your council has that ultimate role in oversight. Okay, ultimate political, legal responsibility for the conduct of the entire tribal government, which includes the housing and the welfare of your communities. They have such an important role in, helping your staff, helping your boards fulfill your housing obligations to our communities. Tribal officials, as well as your tribal staff, have that added responsibility of serving your tribal community in that exemplary manner, in addition to complying with the tribal and the federal laws that govern our housing affairs. As positive role models, your officials facilitate your community housing goals and the objectives, and our housing entities will always continue to look to you for guidance. So establish housing as a priority through the adoption of tribal housing. They, confirm and appoint your commissioners, your committee members, if you have them. Remove them if they're not doing their job. Donating, tribal land. Can you please give, 15, 20 parcels or acres over to the housing authority so we can develop this project? I would always was doing that. Approving housing sites depending upon the land status and your restrictions. Cooperating in the enforcement of all the housing policies. Allocating, funds for infrastructure, road development, water, sewer. That Indian community development block money. Put in for it. And if you're not going to put in for it, tell your housing entity in advance and have them do it. You don't want to give away free money, you know. If you don't get funded, call them up and ask them why. What was weak? What do I have to do better? So you don't make the same mistake and you compete better in the future. That's really important to always do that. Working closely with your staff to develop your short and your long-term housing goals and the objectives. Get them on the BIA roads list, things like that, those roads, those properties. Other times you can have interaction, grievances, disputes by tenants, homebuyers, you know, with respect to their lease. Anything. All participants should always be deferred to the executive director. Another thing, all complaints should be written. You should have a written complaint form in your housing department. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. It's pretty much, you know, the rule of thumb out there when it comes to most things like that. All participants should be deferred to the executive director and respective policies. You might have to actually, especially if you have a new one or a turnover, have a conversation with your chief of police. Say you need to let the housing authority know if they go into a unit and it's trapped. They need to keep you advised of things that you should be aware of. They get in there more often than you do in some cases. You don't want it to be, but that's what happens. You might want to think about having your maintenance staff and your housing staff be mandatory reporters. You know, it took me years to request that out of the tribe, and I finally did. And then I had a couple of my guys come and thank me because they see things and they internally beat themselves up. Should I be saying something? Is it of substance where I am? You know, our staff see things inside of homes that most people don't. I chaired the child welfare for 15 years for my tribe. I know all about that. Think about maybe having them mandatory reporters. That's another thing you can do on that tribal level. Your audits, your monitoring findings, make sure that your executive director and those guys are actually taking care of it. Look at the corrective action plan. Make sure that they achieve that compliance. The bottom line is always refer back to those laws, those federal laws, those regulations, our TDHE policies. A lot of times our policy is a result of those laws and having to be compliant with those. Involve the legal counsel and all your disputes to you know, arrive at a proper solution. Don't ever try to overturn the court in an eviction. It takes so long to get to that point. By that time, they should have been evicted. You know, don't go through that after they've already went through the whole legal process. I've seen it happen where everybody will quit rent. They're not going to evict you. The council won't let them, so they quit paying rent. You know, so monitoring, you know, things like that. Those recipients, our tribes, our TDHEs, we're required to report and be monitored by the beneficiary tribe, by the council. Every recipient is responsible for monitoring their grant activities, their subrecipients, and making sure that they are compliant with all those federal requirements. Even programs that don't have self-monitoring requirements, recipient self-monitoring is beneficial and recommended to all of our organizations to identify and confirm good practices and where you can make improvements. You're required to complete self-monitoring assessments and adherence to our program requirements, our statutes, our regulations at least once a year. It includes doing those inspections. Nobody should be not allowed. Nobody should refuse an inspection nor a recertification. I don't care who it is. I don't care if they sit on the tribal council, the board of commissioners. It doesn't matter. If they're in your housing, you have to do that. It should be in your procedures that they automatically, you know, it's grounds for eviction because they have to be able to do. I've seen cases where, you know, I don't want to show them that. It's because your over income is why you don't want to show them that. You still need to, or the house is trashed, you know, so. Your recipients, therefore, should incorporate sufficient time to make sure that that auditing, you know, that self-monitoring, everything takes place. Okay. So tribal councils have that more affirmative responsibility to exercise your responsibility. Your government should seek to enhance the flow of information and accomplish that. Good way is to have a tribal councilman or a tribal council person on your board of commissioners. Decide if they're going to be needed for a quorum, decide if they can vote, decide if they get a stipend up front. So your monitoring activities, you have to make sure that that monitoring takes place. You are responsible, HUD is responsible for reviewing the recipient and asking or, telling them you need to have some technical assistance. It depends, like I said, how much they're going to get in their grant. When's the last time they had an on-site monitoring? Do they have any delinquent audits? Are their APRs or their IHP late? Those are all things that will trigger, that monitoring. Your on-site inspection, like I said, 10 units or 10%, same thing with your files. They do the current year and 2 years prior unless they find something. And I have been in places where they went back multiple years after that. So just make sure. They're going to look at open monitoring findings, your inspections, your preservation of your 37 Housing Act stuff, all of that. So you can actually ask to be monitored by HUD if you want to. And that's what that last slide said. Do you have to submit your monitoring evaluations to the tribe? Well, yes, you do. What if it identifies a programmatic concern? You need to develop and revise your policies to fix it. Make sure everything's better enforced. Take appropriate administrative action to remedy your situation. You may refer the concern to an auditor or HUD for additional corrective action. So depending. You have responsibility as a tribe to ensure that appropriate corrective action is taken. So you have to do your APR on a yearly basis. Describe the use of your funds, your relationship with your grants, your accomplishments for the year. What are your reasons for slippage? Why do you have planned activities that were not met? So this gets back down to what I was saying about the IHP. Review it. Don't rinse and repeat. If you're putting in for 25 and only using 5 to 10, drop it to 10. You can always go in and amend that because you kind of get graded here. Why did you not? Why do you have cost overruns? Why did you not meet your established goals? They're going to ask, like I said, permanent and temporary jobs supported with those funds. How many units did you complete? How many houses did you or families did you assist? Your outcomes by your eligible activities. And then that performance report has to be submitted within 90 days of the end of your program year. So you have to make that report publicly. Sweet spot is 10 days, as I said, but it does not give you a time frame in writing. HUD will have 60 days to make recommendations under 404 of NAHASDA to answer, your annual performance reports. They generally provide a 30-day written notice of an impending on-site review when they decide to come. Prior written notice is not required in an emergency situation, but it should, all those notices state why they're coming and what they're going to basically do. They have the authority to develop performance measures, that you've complied with all of your required certifications, your fiscal audits have been completed, your annual performance report was submitted in accordance with 514, and you have substantially complied with the requirements under 1000 and all of our federal statutes and regulations. That you reviewed the performance. HUD will look at, any amendments. They'll look at all the records maintained by you. They'll look at, the results of monitoring of your performance and on-site evaluation of the stuff that you've done in the past, your audit reports, your records of your drawdowns, records of comments that you've received by citizens or calls that have been made to them, any type of litigation that you are involved in or have been involved in, and other relevant information that relates to your performance measures. Okay. So then they draft a report within 60 days after they have been on site. Upon written notification, you can exercise your right to take an additional 30 days to complete your review. So you can answer some of your findings at that point, and I would highly recommend that you try to close them up before the final report. It just looks better and it is better. HUD can also revise your draft report based on the comments and additional information that you provided. HUD will make the recipient's comments and a final report readily available not later than 30 days after the receipt of your comments. So they'll issue letters of warning if they need to. I've seen cases where they will make you do all the draws through them. Basically, they have to okay or you know, give the go-ahead for any drawdown that you do. I've seen cases where they've taken the money away. When I came to work for my tribe, nobody was paying rent. So they cut off the subsidy. You weren't doing your job. You weren't being compliant with, you know, collecting those monies. So therefore you weren't doing any maintenance or anything else that we were supposed to be doing. I ended up, it was quite the story when I got here. So it's interesting. That happens all over, you know. So and they can actually replace you with a different recipient should they see fit to run it and take care of everything. So you have to be careful. They don't want to do that. You know, I've seen the administrators come straight down for those meetings. They don't want to do that. They want their tribes to succeed. So just remember that and ask for help. They can recommend the recipient reimburse the program amounts they find were, you know, improperly expended. So I have seen cases, be careful with the amount of the stipends that you give and the trips that you take. Should the council be going or the board of commissioners go and they go for 6-7 days and then they'll ask to see the agenda for whatever they went to. And if housing is only mentioned for an hour and a half, it's hard to pay for a 6-7 day trip or a 5-day trip, you know? So they look at that. Just be careful. They might recommend that you get appropriate technical assistance. That happens a lot. I have been called by different, you know, organizations, and they'll say, we have somebody with monitoring findings. They need to receive procurement. They need A&O. They need to redo this type of policy, and they need to do this. Would you be interested in working with them? And then you go and you try to help them out of that part. I've had other people say, we'd like to ask HUD for you to come in because we're up to get monitored next year and we want all of our ducks in a row, you know? So it goes both ways. The best way is to be prepared, you know? After reasonable notice and opportunity for hearing that they failed to comply with any provision in NAHASDA, HUD can carry out the following actions with future grants. They can limit your payments, like I said. They can reduce the payments. They can terminate them. And, you know, before undertaking any action in accordance with that, HUD will notify the recipient in writing of what it plans to do, okay? The amount in question shall not be reallocated under the provisions of 536. I'm sorry, it did that on accident. I turned it off. I was like an alarm and hit the snooze button. So the amount shall not be reallocated under 536 until 15 days after the hearing has been conducted and HUD has rendered a final decision. So don't get to this part. HUD will make notice to the recipient when it takes action. It'll conduct hearings in accordance with section 401 in NAHASDA after 60 days of such notice. So those are some of the remedial things. So that's basically what can happen. Just be careful. Get your audits if you need them. The threshold, like I said, it went up. So you should be good. If you get more than $1 million, schedule it. Make sure that you schedule it with sufficient time to get it done on time. You can't call an auditor and get on their docket within a month normally. And you can forget it if it's around tax time. So schedule early. Okay. So those are your hearing procedures. You can read about them at 536, 540, 542. And then here's your audit requirements. Like I said, this is not up to date. I just found, and I called our HUD office and they said, yeah, it did go up for us too. Well, why haven't they not published anything? But it's up to $1 million now. Okay. Your single audit, if you, instead of 750, 1 million during your federal entity's fiscal year in federal awards. Okay. So it doesn't have to be just your NAHASDA funds. If you're getting money from somewhere else, that counts in there. Okay. And if you were allowed a biannual audit back to 1987, 92, 95, it's still permitted if you were one of those tribes. Audits, you can pay for the audit. Now, if you are a division of the tribe, you can't pay for the tribe's whole audit. You can only pay for the audit that traces back to your housing expense, okay? If you're a housing entity, a TDHE, you can pay for the whole thing. And that's all that they're auditing. Do you have to comply? Or yes, you have to comply. Do you have to set a copy of your audit to HUD? No, you do not. We send it to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. Do you have to give it to your tribe? Yes, you do. Okay. They, as the grant beneficiary, have to receive a copy of your audit so it can fully carry out their oversight responsibilities. So this last part is, some of the things that you look for. They're going to look for your previous self-monitoring, your corrective actions, any valid complaints, any relevant correspondence they've received about you. They're going to review certain things. Your Indian preference and employment is one of the big things they look at in their pre-visit. And they're going to ask you to send them documents, okay? If you have open audit findings that have not yet been resolved, they're going to become a repeat finding. Then they're going to go into your policies and procedures. This is where it's really important to have all your policies and procedures. Rent and home buyer, eligibility, admission, occupancy, management, maintenance, Indian preference, drug-free workplace, all of it. Then they're going to start looking at your meeting minutes. This is huge. You have to have all of your meeting minutes. They have to be adopted. Do not allow your boards to not adopt them the next month, okay? You should never be sitting on more than 2 sets of meeting minutes. You should only usually be sitting on 1 for adoption. You send them out. Make sure the board gets time to review them like a week before the meeting. You don't hand them to them in the meeting, okay? For you that are tribal council, for you that are in the housing authority, if your tribal council ever makes any decisions regarding housing, you need a copy of their meeting minutes also, guys. They're going to look at your meeting minutes. Do they confirm that you're following your policy, that your board's following the policy, that the tribal council is? Did they confirm the staff is following the policy? Do they reveal any instances where tribal officials have interfered with the board or the tribal council or staff enforcing your policies? This is coming from HUD. This is what they're looking for. They're going to look at your council and your board actions. Do you provide guidance and direction to your management? If applicable, does your governing body review and evaluate the performance of the director? Do your board and tribal council adhere to all the laws, regulations, and policies? This is where it's really important that they don't owe you money and that they're in compliance with all of the rules of the housing entity if they're a tenant. Review the meeting minutes for evidence of non-compliance with federal requirements, recipient policies, meeting etiquette, okay? Make sure that your chair knows how to chair and can keep them on task. They shouldn't be gossiping during the meeting while there's a recording going. Interview the staff. And my guys hated this. They hated this. It's just like, tell them whatever they want to know and tell them the truth. That's what I always told them. Don't be worried. We don't do anything wrong. But why? Because this is the part of how it goes, So they will. And sometimes they'll go out and they go into your units and they interview the recipients, your tenants. So you have to let them know too. So they're going to interview staff and program participants for opinions on whether you're compliant. They're going to review your policies for compliance with federal requirements. Have the board or tribal council place their relatives in housing ahead of others on the waiting list. Okay, that's why you got to take all those steps. Has it been addressed in the A&O policy? If not, address it while they're looking at your organization and staff. Does your board and tribal council allow the recipient to operate without undue interference? Do they interfere with the day-to-day operations of the recipient? Do they override internal or financial controls put in place for the recipient staff? Do they convey the message that integrity and ethical values are not compromised? Are the meeting minutes transcribed and stored to preserve a history of all board and tribal council actions? Are they held in accordance with the terms of the bylaws? You need a copy of the bylaws. Half the time it tells you when and how often they can meet. You need to either follow those or amend your bylaws. Are financial reports reviewed as part of each regular monthly meeting? So if you're not doing that, you're supposed to do that too. Do they receive a stipend to attend meetings? Okay. Is the stipend reasonable in accordance with local practice? So they want to compare it to your child welfare board, to your drug healing to wellness board, to your healthcare board. It should be around the same amount. If, I've seen places where they give board members mileage. Mileage, you should not be paid mileage to go to a board meeting. You get mileage if you have to go somewhere, but so just make sure all of that's not out of whack. Is it reasonable? Compare it, read the guidance. Conflict of interest. They want to know if you have that statement, that policy, if it's been adopted. Are you following all the regulations that we went through earlier in the week? Your complaints and grievances. Do you have a policy or procedure to cover the management of complaints and grievances? Do you have a method to track them? Are there provisions for an impartial hearing panel or an alternative dispute resolution? Are complaints and grievances resolved promptly with fair and reputable action by you as the recipient? And then the certifications that you sign off of on that IHP, they're going to check to make sure you have everything that you certified that you said you did. Okay. Then they're going to start looking at your insurance. They're going to have you show proof of everything that you have is insured. And if not, they're going to call the company or the website and have to get copies. Are the vehicles and equipment properly insured? All of that. That goes for your front end loaders and all that fun stuff too. Do you effectively maintain an insurance file that has a history of claims and other pertinent information? If not, get the list, access the company's website. This is telling them what they need to do. So they're going to verify that you have all of that and the listing of units and things like that. Then they're going to look at your administrative climate. Do you have frequent staff turnover in finance? Frequent staff turnover among key positions? Lack of seniority among the staff? Frequent staff turnover in maintenance? Do you have an org chart? You have to have an org chart, by the way, guys. They always look for that. Emphasis on training and educational opportunities for the staff, for the board, and the tribal council members. They need to know, especially your board of commissioners, what their job is. So they should be getting training. Every time you get new ones, you should be getting more training. You have appropriate staff and board and tribal council members attending training. Is the training adequate? And then they're going to start looking at your records retention. Are they maintained for at least 3 years? Do you have an effective file management and records retention? Can you find it once you file it? And then they'll look at your Indian tribal preference. If you have a tribal preference in employment and contracting, 101 of NAHASDA statute allows that. So, they agree with that. And then they're going to look at your procurement. Keep all those procurement files and things like that also. They'll interview your staff, review your files. If there's problems noted, they're going to research the records to determine if there's any type of violation there. Okay. that's it. I still couldn't stay without making you, 15 minutes late. I'm sorry, guys. I do hope you guys enjoyed the class. Take more training, ask for training, all of it. And have a good weekend too, all of you. It's Friday.
No worries, Cheryl. This is all such important information, and I'm sure no one minds waiting, and we certainly don't mind having it on the recording. I did stick the link to the webinar feedback survey for you folks in the chat. If you don't mind taking a few minutes to complete it for us. Like I've told you each day, it is a new one, even though it is the same webinar series. So even if you did one for the past few days, still super helpful if you can do this last one for us as well. It takes about 3 minutes to complete, and it is anonymous, so no worries about your name or your email being attached to it. Just helps us at the Native Learning Center know what we can work on and what's working well, and we do share the feedback with our instructors, so it's going to help Cheryl as well, and you can show her some love in the survey. We hope you can join us for our next webinar. That is going to be next Thursday. This one's going to be Grant Writing 101, How to Write a Competitive Fundable Grant, with Diane Leonard. She's president of DH Leonard Consulting and Grant Writing Services. This is going to start another series that's a little bit more spaced out because we have Grant Writing 101, then Grant Writing 102, and then Grant Writing 103 over the next several weeks. Feel free to access this as well as our other recorded webinars on our YouTube channel. You can also find the recordings here on the learning platform. They'll all be within their course pages as you click through. We hope you can check out our other upcoming training events as well. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and we post about them frequently. If you are a podcast listener, we have one for you to check out, our podcast that's produced in-house, the Hopathanga Native American podcast. And other than that, folks, we're going to set you free on your Friday. We hope that you have a fantastic weekend. And thank you again for joining us for this incredible 5-day series. Cheryl, thank you so much for taking the week to share your knowledge and your expertise. It's so helpful and so important.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go ahead and cut off the recording, folks, but I am going